again with another great episode of Finding Your Summit, all about people overcoming adversity and finding your way. Today, I have got an amazing guest. Can't wait to talk about the film that she produced. But before we get there, I want to direct the attention to my website, www.markpattisonnfl.com. There's a lot of stuff going on over there. Over 260 episodes of amazing podcasts of people doing incredible things, achieving really amazing, inspiring things that we all need to be inspired every day. And so check those out if you will. If you scroll through, you'll find those there. That's number one. Number two is we continue to raise money for Higher Ground through MT EVEREST. My daughter has epilepsy, and it's been a wonderful experience to try to raise money, help others, and through it all, help my daughter overcome the things that she battles every day, which are seizures. And the last thing is the NFL shot an amazing film, Searching for the Summit, which we won a Best Picture. For anybody watching or listening to this right now on YouTube, you can see Miami right here to my left, which is really cool, and I'm very blessed to have that. So there's a button, you can push that, and you can see the full 30-minute Best Documentary film. Hopefully it will inspire you to do other things and go out there and achieve as well. Okay, on that note, let's jump into today's wonderful guest. Her name is Nancy Svensson. Nancy, how you doing?
Great. Nice to be here. So nice. So pleased to be here. Thanks.
Yeah. Again, I've got all the sun blasting through the window here. I'm in sunny Sun Valley, Idaho. It just snowed about a foot yesterday, and now the sun is out, so it's glistening, and the snow is what I'm used to, what I like. But I want to talk about a couple of things. So number one, you are a movie director. You directed a film, which I want to talk about, called Pasang, In the Shadows of Everest. And before we get there, I want to start back on your particular journey on how you got introduced to storytelling. Where did that love come from you?
That love came from a deep, deep place in my childhood, honestly. I mean, I have been telling stories for as long as I can remember. And I think back to when I was, I don't know, 10, 12. I mean, we had a little neighborhood group of kids where it was the playwriting group, and we would climb up into our treehouse and we would write plays, and then we would put them on for the neighborhood.
Uh-huh.
And I loved books as a child. I was one of those kids that, was always reading and rereading the same book over and over again, loving the power that storytelling had for me in my life. It felt like something that could inspire me, to either, amazing joy or move me to tears. And it's something that as I grew up, I really found had powers in other ways. The storytelling has power to actually make people do things, to change their lives, to inspire change and all kinds of things. So I mean, it started really young.
Yeah. Well, there's actually there's no question that along that journey too, that there was this pull for you to really be talking about women empowerment as well. And kind of the underdog in some of the stories that it seems like you've come up with and you've been behind. And again, we're going to get into this really amazing story about Pasang, but from your standpoint, why was that? Did you see an injustice, or you just wanted to be a spokesperson for women in general, or did you just find those stories more compelling to you?
Well, as a woman, first of all, I think part of it goes all the way back to my mom. My mom, I grew up in a small town in Iowa, small farming town. My mom actually grew up on a farm during the Depression. And she wanted more than anything to go to school. She actually had to move to town. There were no school buses. She had to move to town when she was 12 and live by herself in a little, guest house, so she could go to high school. And then she, at 16 graduated and, got her first school, country school, where she had to walk 2 miles in the snow and start the fire. I mean, it was, here I am today. That sounds like it was Laura Ingalls Wilder back in the, in the 18 whatever. But it was my mom. And she felt that education was the most important thing, and that for women to be educated. So she got an education. She put herself through college, saving money, teaching. She got a teaching job and saved money. And I watched my mom, and I listened to her talking about how empowering it was for women to be educated. And then, I came out of college, and I guess sort of played it safe. I needed to support myself. I got a job. I kind of happened into a career in the medical field, in medical business, and I ended up being good at it, and I got promoted, and here, and all of a sudden here, this was my career. I was a healthcare executive, and I found myself in so many, I guess, situations where I'm in a room full of men, and that I would be negotiating deals, and then afterwards the celebrations, the men celebrated, and I didn't always get invited. I mean, I really did feel the difference. I felt that there was something there, and I felt how incredibly important it is for women to raise other women up. I mean, it was my mom raising me up. I mean, my mom saying, we stand on the shoulders of the women that came before us. And so I think it started at a really young age, but then I really saw it in the workplace, and not that there weren't some amazing men, very dear friends that I worked with and that were incredibly supportive, but there is a pattern. I think we all know there's a pattern, and that kind of those kinds of issues exist for women, and that it is many times harder for women to get the same recognition as men. So that's that came through lived experiences, honestly. And when I came upon this story, Pasang really came alive for me as someone who lived it in a much bigger way than I had lived it.
Well, there draws the parallel right now, and I can certainly understand why. Again, trying to lift up other women, and in the story with Pasang, we we're going to talk about here in a minute, really resonated with you in a way that you wanted to go out there and really highlight her story. And what an incredible story! So let's talk about that. So first of all, I want to plug Allison Levine. I know she's your executive producer on the film. She was on a podcast with me probably 150 episodes ago. So it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
And she was wonderful. And she's, for anybody that doesn't know, Allison Levine has climbed the 7 summits. I think actually she's done the Explorers Grand Slam, which also includes the South and North Pole. So she's one up on me on that. But she's remarkable. She's a public speaker, and she does have some influence out there. And certainly she's been on Everest a couple of times. And so this film, Pasang, and let me just give a quick setup, and then I want to ask the question. So the quick setup is she ultimately became the first Nepalanese woman to climb Mount Everest in 1993. Okay. Mm-hmm. But in order to get there were just all these hardships, and going back, and I've obviously been in Nepal now since I climbed Mount Everest, but it's such a male-dominated society to think that any woman, and 1993 doesn't seem that far long ago. It's not like 1950 or something, but it's still very male-dominated. The women are more or less expected to raise the children and cook the food and, do those types of things. And the men are out doing other types of jobs, but very traditional, in that sense. And so any idea of having a woman go up and dominate and climb Mount Everest back in those days wasn't really a thought. So where did this, how and when did this story land in your lap?
It's 10 plus years ago. I was working away in the healthcare field. Like I said, I had big jobs. I was traveling a ton. And my sister met a man that she worked with in San Francisco, and they ended up getting married. And his name is Dorji Sherpa. Mm-hmm. They met at work and fell in love and got married. And so I was having dinner at their house, like I said, 10 plus years, probably 12, 13 years ago. And Dorji, over a lovely bottle of wine, told me this story about his sister. And Mark, it was one of those, like, I don't know if you've ever had an aha moment,
Yeah.
a moment that sort of pierces through everything. And I was just so struck and moved by this story of his sister. And certainly the way that Dorji told it, which was, from this incredibly heartfelt place of a lot of grief, honestly, because when Dorji's the eldest brother, a family of five brothers, one sister. And he was actually in the States. And he grew up guiding people on Everest. His father was a Sirdar. The whole family, they were up in the Khumbu, and Dorji had come to the United States by the time his sister was really doing her climbing, and he lived then full time in the States, and he didn't get to go back when she passed away, when she summited and passed away. And I think he lived with that sadness and that sense of mourning ever since. And so he told me about her and about about what an amazing person she was, what a charismatic and dynamic person she was, that just was never satisfied with what somebody else told her, what was what she was allowed to have, right? She wanted more, and she wanted to define her own life. And he told me this story, and then he told me how he hadn't been able to be there, and how he'd really wanted to make a film right after she died, and he'd contacted a local Bay Area filmmaker, Rick Tejada Flores, and together they got a little bit of money from somebody and went back to Nepal and filmed some interviews. And this was, again, back in the late 90s. So thank God he did that, because we have these amazing archival interviews of people, some of whom are no longer living, closer to when all of the events actually happened. But then they came back to the States and tried to get funding for the film. And as so often happens with documentaries, independent documentaries, they couldn't get funding, and they just put all the footage in a box, put it up over in the store, in Rick's storeroom, and kind of forgot about it. And so it was after Dorji told me this story, and I carried the story around with me for probably a year, and thinking about it. And then it turned out that I had the opportunity to step out of what I was doing. They were moving my whole division to Nashville, and I had the opportunity to take a nice severance package. And I said, I'm going to make this film. And I went to Dorje. I said, will you help me? I'd like to make this film. And of course, knowing that I had never made a film, I had been in an entirely different industry. But he said, yeah, Nancy, I'll help you. Let's do it. And so I embarked on this whole 10-12 year project of making this film.
So you kind of spilled the beans a little bit, but it took, I believe it was her fourth attempt before she actually made it to the top, which means she tried 3 times earlier, didn't make it, her fourth time. And the heroic thing is that she makes it up there, and then on her way down, there was bad weather or something that came up, and she ends up falling off the mountain, and she passes away and dies. And so we're going to talk about kind of her celebrity, post-mortem after she did pass, and what the Nepalanese have done. But I can't imagine, as a Nepalanese person, just in general, where the average salary with the Sherpas is $6,000 a year. And that's on today's dollar. I can't imagine what it was back in 1993. And then you take this as a woman trying to pull this off, and not just once, not twice, 3 times or 4 times, actually going through this and having to go raise money in a way that people are going to support her, when again, it's a very male dominated culture. So to try to make that happen, I can only imagine the type of person she must have been, relentless to try to get this done.
Yeah, she was. It's hard, given 2022 and our Western lenses that we're looking at this story through. It's really hard to fully appreciate, I think, what it took for someone like her. Here she was. Yes, she was a woman in a male-dominated society. And remember, this is the 80s and the 90s in Nepal. It was still a Hindu kingdom there, and then there was in the backdrop these yearnings for democracy that were kind of all over the globe. It was when the Berlin Wall fell, all of this, and that was happening in Nepal as well. And so here she was, a woman, here she was an indigenous woman. So as a Sherpa woman, 90% of Nepal is Hindu, and Sherpas are less than 10% of the population. They're Buddhist. And so they don't fall into the caste system. So the caste system that was certainly very much in effect in the 80s and 90s, and of course still is today. But I mean, all of the ruling people, the ruling party, the king and all of government officials would have been high caste Hindu. And Pasang, as a Sherpa woman, her first language was Sherpa, which is an unwritten language. And so when she ran away from her arranged marriage, found her partner, and they ended up, walking to Kathmandu back in the 80s and to make their life together, because that was the only way you could get there when you had, no money. And, she would have had to learn Nepali. And she would have spoken Nepali with a really heavy country accent. And she would have been looked at as a kind of a country bumpkin by the ruling parties, by the government officials. She would have been ignored. She would have been taught that as a woman, as an indigenous woman at that time, she really wasn't even allowed to make eye contact with these high government officials, because they were so much above her in terms of their place in society. And in fact, the term outcast comes from being outside of the caste system. She was an outcast outside of the entire caste system. And so you think about that, and then couple it with, mostly men on Everest, and her first expedition, which she actually was a part of a French expedition that was put together by a French climber named Marc Bitard. And there was, in talking with so many people on that expedition, both French women climbers. It was the climb where the first French woman summited, actually, Christine Jeannin. But talking with all those climbers, and I've talked with lots of other Western climbers, I find that there is a lack of understanding about what it would have taken for somebody in Pasang's position to even be in a place where they were attempting to summit Everest. Number one, just the money to put together the expedition, training. She had no training. I mean, she didn't belong to a gym. I mean, she didn't, you think about what, so many of the elite climbers do to prepare for Everest, and especially now, right? Sleeping in hyperbolic chambers and all kinds of things, and all the latest technology, and in terms of what they, their gear and instruments. When Pasang went up on her fourth climb, the government would not even allow them as a Nepali expedition to have walkie-talkies, because it was a controlled item because of the fears of political unrest. And so they didn't even have walkie-talkies on that expedition, which quite honestly could have saved her life. So I think that it is, yes, we can look back and appreciate, but when you learn a little bit more about all of the cultural trappings that existed at the time, it was pretty damn amazing that she, was there on the mountain and trying to do something that everybody told her she couldn't do, including her government.
Yeah, I mean, that's nuts. And look, I had a lot of people saying that I wouldn't do it, and I had all those things that you talked about, the just the bells and whistles of climbing today versus 20 years ago, 15, it's just it's a different game. I do have a gym. I do live at the mountains. I have all the best equipment, all those kind of things. So, and most importantly, probably I had walkie-talkies, in case something, went south. But where on the mountain, since I've been there from top to bottom, where on the mountain did she fall to her death?
Well, she didn't actually fall to her death. She summited, and then they came back down to the south summit, and they bivouacked overnight at the south summit. Mm-hmm. And she'd actually done the same thing 2 years before and survived and came down in 91. And so I think that she and everybody felt that, that she might survive, but they ran out of oxygen during the night. She was with two other Sherpas. And the one of them, who had been the Sirdar on the expedition, Sonam Sering Sherpa, was having some sort of health issue where he was coughing blood. He was really impaired.
Mm.
And then she was out, they ran out of oxygen because they summited late. Number one, it was after 2, which is really kind of the cutoff
Mm.
time at, worst case scenario for when you're supposed to turn around. And then they got down, it was a snowstorm had come in from the Tibet side. And so the visibility was really bad. They made it down to the south summit, and then they ran out of oxygen. So then they stayed for the night. And one of the Sherpas, Pemba Norbu Sherpa, who I interviewed, he was still okay the next morning. Pasang was completely clear mentally, but she couldn't get up. I mean, she was the lack of oxygen overnight after she'd been on oxygen. She couldn't get up. And then Sonam Sering was actually very sick. So she told Pemba Norbu to go down to Camp 4 and bring oxygen up to them. And so he did. So she was alive that morning, and he went down to Camp 4. And as this was all happening, this incredible snowstorm, I mean, it was just it lasted for 10 days. I mean, it was an incredible storm. And so he got down to Camp 4, and there were 3 other Sherpas there and some oxygen, and they made an attempt they started to try to get back up to them, and they just couldn't make it. So they went back. And so that's, when they actually mounted a rescue effort an effort to bring the bodies back, which was also unprecedented. I mean, she's the first Sherpa whose body was ever retrieved from Everest. And so they went up and they found her at the south summit, frozen. Sonam Sering, however, they did not find, and suspicion is that he just was blown off. It was such a fierce storm, and it's such a small place, as you know.
Yeah, well, yeah, very steep too, to say the least. Yeah, I feel very blessed because when I made it down to 26.5 Camp 4, I spent the entire night with no O's. I had run out, and so the fact that I'm sitting there having this conversation with you today, I feel very blessed. How I survived the night, I have no clue, but it's just the way it played out. Okay, so let's talk about 2 things. One, the celebration of her life. It seemed like the government, now I may have this wrong, but the government kind of made a pivot and went from, we don't want to recognize this person, to now we want to celebrate this woman who became the first woman to climb Mount Everest.
Mm-hmm. Very true. They went from charging her the full $25,000 fee that they charged all of the foreign expeditions. She went and actually got an audience with the prime minister and asked them to waive that fee, given it was an all Nepali team, and he wouldn't do it, or the government wouldn't do it. So I think, and I think they really underestimated her in terms of her power, her star power, the number of people who were aware of what she was doing. Because, I mean, remember, she's some Sherpa. I mean, they really had very little regard at that time. Today, Sherpas have a lot more economic power, but at that time, they were just starting to gain economic power in Nepal. And so I think personally that they, when they saw that she summited and then she, went missing, there were headlines in the newspapers, on TV, "Where's Pasang?" She'd done these press conferences. And I think they realized they had a problem that, they needed to try to fix, because they hadn't supported her. That was public knowledge. And so, they actually went back to the family, in Kathmandu, and tried to refund the $25,000 that they had, made her pay to climb for the permit, and the family refused. But so yes, the government did. Certainly, if you read a lot of the news reports of the time, there was a lot of criticism from, again, some of the, the high caste publications, et cetera, about what a big deal. They made such a big deal. But they ended up giving her the Nepal Tara, which is the highest honor that Nepal can bestow. The other person that has the Nepal Tara in recent history is Tenzing Norgay, who of course summited with Sredman Hillary.
Yeah.
And then they had this huge public display or outpouring of grief. They brought the body down. The body went to the house for a few days, and as in Buddhist custom, and then they took the body and made this circle around Kathmandu, and thousands of people were in this procession. They took her to the soccer stadium downtown, and they had people could come and pay respects there, and then they took her body up to a well-known Buddhist shrine, and they burned the body there again, according to Buddhist customs. So, and now, they built a life-size statue of Pasang, which exists today in Boda in Kathmandu, and there's a postage stamp, and there's a school and hospital and all kinds of things named after her. So they really, after the fact, did go quite far to honor her.
So let's talk about the film now in its entirety. It's been in several different film festivals. I think you've won some awards and things like that. What has that experience been for you? Going around a lot of times sometimes you don't always have to be there, but a lot of times the director is there and stands up and answers questions and everything at the end. The reception, all those types of things. What's that been like for you?
It's been amazing. Number one, this was a film, a labor of love over a decade of my life. So to see audiences, or to experience it with audiences and feel them really loving Pasang and weeping and being inspired has been everything. It's what I wanted, for the film. So it's been great. We started in March at Santa Barbara. That was our launch, the Santa Barbara International Film Festival. And we've been to quite a number of festivals, and yes, it's great to win awards. That's validation that both audiences, because we won a few audience awards, and also juries. We've won a number of Best Mountain Film at Banff. We just won an award over at Kendall Mountain in the UK. We won one at Mountain Film in Telluride. And that's validation that others, number one, that juries and filmmakers see this as, a film that's well made and a story that's important to tell. So it's been really validating for me as a filmmaker and for my team. As you mentioned, Alison Levine has been a supporter for many years and been instrumental as kind of leading my executive producer group in terms of helping to get funding for the film and really get the word out. And the rest of my team, an amazing group of executive producers, Jan Katzoff, Robert Fishbach, and my team. Jeffrey Friedman is my editor. He's an Academy Award winning Bay Area documentary filmmaker. I've been completely blessed to have this amazing team, both on the creative side and on the financial business side.
That's awesome. And where can people find this film?
Well, we're still in festivals, so we have that's going to be wrapping up in the first quarter. We have a few more festivals. We're going to be in Bilbao, Spain next week, cool. But and we have another. We're going to be in Boulder, actually, I think the first week in March at the Boulder Film Festival. But we're in active conversations with a couple streamers right now, and so we expect that in the spring we are hoping to dovetail a streaming release with these several tentpole events that are happening. March, as you know, is Women's History Month and International Women's Day. And then in April, April 22nd, April is the 30th anniversary of Pasang's climb. And May is the 70th anniversary of Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay's climb. And so our whole film team plans to be in Kathmandu and probably up in Namche Bazaar in April, celebrating because the folks in Nepal haven't seen the film yet. So this is going to be our big Nepali launch. And again, we're hoping that we will be able to have some kind of a streaming deal by then as well. So, but people can certainly follow along on our website which is pasangmovie.com, which always has the latest in terms of what festivals are coming up or any private screenings, that sort of thing.
Love it. Okay, listen, it's been wonderful to listen to your story, kind of coming out of right field. You fell towards certainly a pursuit of passion to create this film. it's now winning awards and all these different film festivals. And, again, following your dreams and what you like to do, which at the end of the day, going all the way back to when you're a kid, storytelling. And I think you've done a great job. I've seen some of the trailers and things like that. It looks really cool. So I just am here trying to promote the film, and anybody that wants to go out there, again, the name of the film is called Pasang, in the Shadows of Everest, and you can find all information, pasangthemovie.com. I think that's right.
Pasang movie, all one word, pasangmovie.com.
Pasang movie, there you go. Okay, there it is. Thank you so much for coming on, Nancy. There she is, the one, the only Nancy Benson.